Okay, we're almost there. Almost there.
Okay, that's not a problem. I'm still organizing myself here.
Hi, everybody. This is Steve Sapodowski, publisher of BodyBuzz.com. This afternoon, Professor Dr. Ed Chervenak and Ed Chervenak from UNO, and I are going to be talking politics, in this particular case, Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office and a poll that he did covering that race and also the upcoming parish president's race, at least in terms of the favorabilities and non-favorabilities of the current president, Mike Yenny. So, good afternoon, Ed. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you, thank you. So, we put up the poll that UNO put out. Why don't you give us some background information about it? And I know that we publish it on Bayou Buzz and put up on Facebook and elsewhere. But we'd like to get just an overview if you could.
Sure. We conducted what's known as an interactive voice response poll, an IVR poll, which is basically a robocall poll, where people hear a tape and then push buttons to respond to the questions that they receive. And so we talked to 767 people in Jefferson Parish, asking about who they preferred in the upcoming sheriff's race. And we also asked what they thought about the job performance of Parish President Mike Yenny. And what we found in the sheriff's race is that John Fortunato has a double-digit lead, a bit down from what we found in the fall, but still a substantial lead according to what we found. And that Mike Yenny continues to be underwater in his approval ratings. More people disapprove of his performance than approve. And we haven't really seen any change in people's attitudes towards him from the poll we did in the fall to the one we just did last week.
Okay, so you did it in October, so we're talking about roughly 5 months.
Right.
Okay. So pretty much, what were your findings in October?
Well, there we saw that the findings for Mike Yenny were pretty much the same. They really haven't changed from October to March. What we did find was that Joe Lopinto did pick up some support, primarily from undecideds, from women, and from Republicans, and so he was able to decrease the gap. I think he had like a 25-point gap in the fall. It's down to 16. So it appears that he has momentum in this race. I know it's a very short time till the election. It's on the 24th, so he's running out of time. But it does appear that he has had some momentum over the last several months. But Fortunato, certainly has the advantage. I'd rather be in his shoes right now, according to the poll, than I would Lopinto's. And so it's hard to say what's going to happen. I'm not going to say that it's over. It's never over till it's over. That's why we hold the elections. That's why the teams play the game. And we've seen recently that John Fortunato basically came out and said that he would not have pushed to remove Mike Yenny from his office, contrary to the preferences of most of the people in Jefferson Parish. I mean, as you know, that they attempted to do a recall election, but couldn't collect the requisite number of signatures to get that on the ballot. And so that may give Lopinto an opening. We'll have to see whether people are upset about his support for Mike Yenny at a time when people really disapprove of his performance in office. And so, it's really, really hard to say, because we have to remember that in these IVR polls, we're only calling landlines. We're not calling cell phones. It's illegal for us to robocall cell phones, and that's just a federal guideline that we have to abide by. So certainly, we're probably missing a portion of the electorate. But that being said, we do post-weight our results to match the voter registration file. So, if it's 13% young people, then we're going to have 13% young people in our poll. And it's minorities and young people who are most likely to miss um, in these robocall polls. And it's the older folks we're more likely to get. And so this is what kind of gives us a bit of confidence in the results that we're getting.
Okay, so roughly we're talking about a 3-4% error margin.
For 767 people, it's about a plus or minus 3.5 percentage points, and that's at a 95% confidence level.
Oh,
So
okay.
the larger your sample, the smaller your margin of error.
Right, right. I believe that in October the sample was about half of.
Yeah, the sample was 426 people there, and the margin of error there was plus or minus 4.8%.
Okay. Again, if anybody has a question, a comment, we're here for you. So we'd like to get your comments. Um, so actually, one person has said that I guarantee you that it's over. Uh, thanks to Here's Johnny. That's Terry Friedman said that. Um, but you don't think it is over?
Well, it's you know, as an election analyst, I learned my lesson in November. Everyone was saying that Hillary was going to win, and I'm guilty of the same thing, based on all the metrics and based on all the probability models and everything. It's over. She's going to win. And so I learned my lesson. I shouldn't say never, but I'm not going to say that it's over until we actually count the ballots and then get an idea of who wins and who has not, because we just know that surprises can happen. There could just be a huge shift all of a sudden. There could be some event that comes along between now and election day that changes people's minds. And so that's why I say it's not over. It's not over until, we count those ballots on Saturday night.
Sure, sure. I was kind of surprised with the results, to be honest with you. I really was. I hadn't, I had forgotten about your October poll, and hadn't really been keeping track of any other polls. Were you surprised at all?
I am a bit surprised.
Yeah.
That there is as big a gap as there is, because Joe Lopinto is the incumbent. And so, he's the one who's in the news all the time now. But at a certain level, the numbers make sense because John Fortunato just has much higher name recognition than Joe Lopinto does. Fortunato was Harry Lee's spokesman for decades.
Yeah.
And so people got to know his face, they got to know his name. Whereas Joe Lopinto has only been sheriff for maybe 6 months or so.
Right.
And so I think the name recognition is what's really driving a lot of the numbers. And this is just kind of from my gut here, that I just get a sense that there's an anti-establishment push that, Harry Lee appointed Newell Norman to be the next sheriff, and then Newell Norman appointed Joe Lopinto to be the next sheriff, and people are probably saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the way it's supposed to work. This is a democratic society. It's the voters who get to decide who sits in that office. It shouldn't just be appointed, from one sheriff to another. So there I kind of get the sense there's this anti-establishment push, or there's kind of resentment against kind of this just coronation type politics. And so I think that's what may be driving the numbers as well. So I think it's a couple of things: name recognition, certainly, and the fact that people are saying, look, we didn't elect Joe Lopinto. He may be a nice guy, he may be an effective sheriff, but we didn't get a say. And I think that's what people want. They want a say in who the next sheriff's going to be.
Okay, and actually Fortunato was really close to Harry Lee, and he's been pushing her. Yeah.
He's part of the establishment too.
Yeah.
We can't forget that. He was there for decades and was, at Harry Lee's hip for almost 20 years. And so he's part of the establishment too, but he's able to run as this kind of anti-establishment candidate.
Sure. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to put up an image, please forgive me, uh, make sure that I'm going to. Okay, so it's up there right now, and I know that you're not able to see it right now, but the image is voter preference in Jefferson Parish Sheriff selection by party identification.
Okay. All right. I got that table in front of me. All right. So what we're showing was a big increase in support for John Fortunato among Democrats. About a 20 percentage point increase, 38% in October to about 58% in March. And I think a lot of that is coming from the West Bank. The third district is probably the most Democratic district in the parish. And so I think he's picking up a lot of support from that particular portion of the parish. I think he went up to 56% of the East Bank. And so I just think that the East Bank is really rallying around John Fortunato at this point. And he's got some areas on the West Bank is rallying around John Fortunato right now, particularly in the third district. I think among African Americans primarily, who are predominantly Democratic. So I think that's where a lot of that is coming from. But he's been pretty stagnant with Republicans. He was at 44% in October. He's only at about 48% now, where we see Lopinto picking up support among Republicans. And I think that's probably the East Bank folks, District 5, primarily, I think is the most heavily Republican portion of that parish. But it's the other, the non, what do I want to say? The other parties or the independents seem to have bailed on Fortunato, and a lot of them have moved into Lopinto's camp, but a lot of them has also moved into the undecided camp as well. And so those are the folks that are, the independents, those are your kind of floating voters, right? That they really haven't made up their mind. And so, they may be for a candidate at this particular time, and then next time we ask them, could be a completely different set of preferences.
Okay, so I'm trying to put up another picture, but I'm having some problems. So, in terms of age, if I recall correctly, the young people appear to be gravitating towards Lopinto. He's younger. But he's also getting a better share of the plus 65, the more dedicated voters. Am I correct?
Yeah, we got all the same page here. What did we do with the age here? It's Yenny. I thought I had it right in front of me here. Oh my goodness. Let me see here. Here we go.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I got a pile over here and I got a pile over here. All right. So it looks like Fortunato has picked up a few of the younger voters, the 18 to 34. These are the millennials. Now he's winning across all the age categories. But his margins have narrowed a bit, particularly among older folks, and so that's a well, let's see. It's Lopinto has picked up among the older folks, and that's a good thing because it's the older folks who are going to show up for this election. Mm-hmm. Older folks are chronic voters. This is a special election, and those are the people who will show up for all elections, even if there's nothing at stake. Older folks will show up for that election. So if Lopinto is picking up support among those folks, that's good news for him. Looks like for Fortunato, his support has been fairly steady. It hasn't really it's within the margin of error. It hasn't really increased or decreased. So he's remained steady. And so that's kind of, the story of this poll is that there have just been certain groups that Lopinto is doing better with this time around, whereas Fortunato has been relatively static. And so the question is can Lopinto continue that momentum? Can he continue to pick up those undecideds and surge ahead of Fortunato? And, for me, that's the $64,000 question. Now, 16 points, that's a lot to overcome. That's not to say that it's impossible, but it's going to, if these numbers are reflective of what's going out there, then it's going to be difficult for him to overcome that deficit.
So what I'm trying to understand is this. From what I understand that you're saying is that Lopinto, a state representative without a whole lot of name recognition, basically got out there and in October he didn't do too well.
Right.
He's got more name recognition.
Right.
Much more, but he's doing a whole lot worse.
Well, he's not actually. No, he's actually doing better.
But in terms of the difference, the margin, you're talking about 16 points.
But he was at 25 points in October. Let's see here. Yes, he was only at 19% in October. He's at 32% now, and we went from 37% undecided to 27%. So the 15% out of that 17% moved into his column.
Okay.
And so he's actually doing better.
So he's getting most of the undecideds.
Yes. So a lot of those undecideds are moving into to support him. Now, yeah, he is certainly getting more name recognition, but at the same time, he's got an opponent who's basically going to say, look, he's not ready for the job. This idea of experience matters. And so that's maybe kind of stunting some of his growth. If, in fact, if there was probably no campaign and he didn't have an opponent, then his numbers would probably be increasing just with those undecideds. But so he is doing much better than he was in October, and particularly with older folks, with Republicans, and with just undecideds overall.
Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go put up a tweet here, and I know that you can't see it, but I'll read it to you. And I found this to be really kind of an interesting tweet. It says this is from Jim Mustian, I think is how you say his name.
Yes, Jim.
Okay, John Fortunato says he would support in battle Jefferson Parish President Mike Yenny in re-election. Now, you had brought that up. Yes.
And for me, that would seem to provide an opening for Joe Lopinto. I mean, just think of the effort that was made to recall Mike Yenny, even though it's almost impossible to, recall a parish-wide official in Louisiana. I mean, you need to collect a third of registered voters just to get on the ballot. Because he is not viewed, favorably. Now, I want to qualify that because when we say favorably, we're talking about job approval. And that there's a difference between favorability ratings and job approval ratings.
Okay.
What we asked about were job approval ratings. How do they think about his performance in office? And so they're unhappy with his performance in office. Now, if we were asked whether they had a favorable attitude towards him or an unfavorable attitude, that's a matter of whether they like him or dislike him personally. But I think the job performance numbers are a good proxy for how people feel about Mike Yenny. They're unhappy with his performance in office. They're probably just unhappy with the fact that he's still in office, despite the fact there was this robust recall effort. And so this is something that Lopinto, I would assume, would be using as ammunition in his campaign to say, look, John Fortunato is out of step with the rest of the electorate. Mike Yenny is a pariah, but Mike Yenny's a pariah, but John Fortunato supports him. I wouldn't be surprised to see an ad being produced right now on that very subject.
Absolutely. In fact, I was checking some of the comments on Facebook, and some people were very, very angry about that particular statement, uh, and holding it against Fortunato. Although I suspect that they may have been against Fortunato to start with, at least some of the people who have made that statement.
Right,
But
right. There's probably some of that. If you're not supporting him, you're going to call him out on that particular statement. If you do support him, you may kind of, maybe he kind of misspoke, or you'll give him the benefit of the doubt somehow.
sure.
We tend to be there's this uh, thing called stickiness when it comes to vote behavior, that once we tend to attach ourselves to a candidate, that we stick with that candidate despite some pitfalls or maybe some problems along the way. Donald Trump probably being the best example of stickiness, right? That his base is going to stick with him no matter what he says, no matter what he does. And so the same we could probably be applying here in the sheriff's race.
Okay, so here's another tweet here I'm putting up for everybody to see, and it's actually from Tyler Bridges. A new poll, Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Race. This one is with JMC for a real estate developer. I'm not sure who the developer is, but shows that Sheriff Lopinto with a 3% lead over John Fortunato. Poll surveyed likely voters.
Right.
Poll last week of registered voters gave Fortunato a 16-point lead. My guess is that latest poll is more accurate, likely versus registered voters. Have you seen that other poll?
I did. I saw the poll. I looked at the JMC poll, and yeah, he's basically called people who voted in the October 17th primary. So that's how he's defining likely voters. And so we're talking basically to two different populations, in essence. We're talking the registered voters, whereas they're talking to people who showed up in that October primary. In addition, he's also included some cell phone numbers in that poll as well. I think 14% were cell phones. So there are going to be differences. There's just no doubt. And my sense is that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, right? That it's hard to see, Fortunato winning by 16 points. But given that gap, it's, hard to see how he's going to win. But particularly if you look at that poll, that District 1 and District 3 are severely underrepresented in the poll. And those are the East Bank districts. And so I think, in one district, 20% are registered voters reside in that district, but he only has 14% of the people from that district in his poll. So there's just going to be differences. And I think, whether that, we won't know which poll is accurate until election night. So, you can guess, oh yeah, that one may be accurate, and it may be, but we really can't say right now, because we're basically I don't want to say two completely different populations, because we are talking to a lot of older folks, and they're the ones who are going to be voting. But given the fact that one of the things that we like about our poll is that when we ask the Mike Yenny approval disapproval questions, that it's a good control, right, for any shift that we see in the sheriff's race, because we see very steady attitudes in the question about Mike Yenny. Nothing's really changed. Attitudes are pretty much the same in October as they were in the March, but we see change in the sheriff's race, right? With Lopinto picking up those undecided. So that gives us some confidence in our poll that we are seeing a shift, and that, is it going to be 16 points? To be honest, I kind of doubt it. I think it's probably going to be more like 10 percentage points.
either way, or in favor
Well,
of
I think, like I
Fortunato?
said, I think it's going to be in the somewhere in the middle. That the
Okay,
we have these two extremes and these two poles, and I think the truth somewhere going to be somewhere in the middle.
right. Now the election that he took that poll from, I'm trying to remember that we had a treasurer's race that nobody showed up to vote.
Right, right. So it's the idea that it was a special election, and so he's just trying to model his electorate or his sample to look like that electorate in the special election.
But there wasn't a Jefferson Parish specific
No, no,
election,
no.
and it was for statewide rather than local.
Right, right.
So the issues are really, I mean, it's just a question of if you showed up. If and those were very loyalists. Those were party loyalists that
Yes,
showed up.
it was a very low turnout election, and I suspect that the sheriff's race. This is a big deal in Jefferson Parish. This is a very powerful position. A lot of people will say that's probably the second most powerful position after being governor, because you're in charge of a large organization. People are always looking for your endorsement, for your help in their elections. So one of the things I'll be looking at is early voting. How much enthusiasm is out there in terms of this particular election, and maybe to compare early voting from this election to early voting in that October 2017 election.
Okay, so let's see if there's any other comments at this point. One of the things I wanted to ask you about Mike Yanni, and I know that you touched upon that. Um, he improved in terms of job performance by 4%, I believe.
Well, his disapproval numbers went down by 4 percentage
Okay,
points, and the number with those no opinion went up by 4%. So his approval rating didn't really change. And statistically speaking, it hasn't really changed either. I mean, yeah, there's a slight little bump down in disapproval and a slight little bump up. But it's it's almost within that margin of error. So statistically speaking, we can say really hasn't changed at all. So 4 percentage
right.
points.
Now,
Um,
you made the distinction in terms of the favorables versus job performance.
yes,
And have you seen anything that actually separated the two and that you can correlate?
I have not seen anything in terms of how favorable people are towards him or not. Um, we tend to just focus on job performance. We do so with the governor. Every time we do a statewide poll, we ask about the governor's job performance. And so we just wanted to be consistent and ask about what people thought about his job performance, because I think that's a much more objective um, gauge on how people are thinking about him, as opposed to whether they like him or not. That's much more subjective in terms of, oh, geez, he's involved in the sexting scandal, and this is why we stick with it, because it's kind of a political sciencey way, right, of gauging support for the individual.
Right, right. Okay, well, I think we pretty much have covered the waterfront. If you so let me see if I can ballpark this. If I'm Fortunato, okay, and I see that the lead is, my lead is evaporating somewhat, whether it's down to 16 or to a virtual tie. Um, what I'm going to try to do is I know that I'm getting the more traditional voter, the Democrat in Jefferson Parish. Blacks are turning out for me in Jefferson Parish, um, and, uh, and I probably would get a pretty good part of the plus 65 population.
Hmm.
So so I would target that as well as the East Bank.
Yeah, definitely want to target the West Bank.
Although Minnesota, what?
That's where
Okay,
his base of strength is. So he's got to get those folks out, turn them out. He seems to be relatively popular out in the Kenner area of the parish, so get those folks out. Uh, you know, like I said, the polls are telling different things, and so there's just lots of uncertainty, and so you're just going to have to put press the pedal to the metal. One thing I think we should look for is who's going to be engaged in more negative campaigning. That'll tell us who's ahead and who's behind. If we see one candidate just begin to start going negative, to the exclusion of everything else, that's usually a pretty good proxy that their numbers are showing that they're behind and they need to bring their opponents' numbers down. So that's what I'll be looking for, for the next 10 days. It's just how much negative campaigning there'll be. And where it's coming.
One other question, if I might, and that is that, in terms of the type of discussion I've seen on Facebook in particular, deals with the issue of experience. The argument in favor of John Fortunato is that he's had, 45 years experience. And then the question becomes, well, what is the experience? Obviously he was injured, and then he became the spokesperson, the information director, appointed by Harry Lee. So some people feel that that's not really sufficient experience to be the sheriff of the parish. On the other hand, you have Joe Lopinto, who, a young guy who was a state representative in charge of the criminal justice committee in the state house. Also an attorney, just like Harry Lee was. An attorney who really didn't have any police experience, if I recall correctly. Lopinto has limited actual duty experience. So how much of a role do you have any idea in terms of people who are really honing in on experience?
Well, I think you're correct that they're both defining it in different ways. They're both using this in their ads. I'm the experience, or real experience matters type ads. And I think they both can lay claim to the experience label. Certainly Fortunato, decades with Harry Lee, and he certainly understands Harry Lee's approach to policing. But Joe Lopinto, he was mentored by Newell Norman, appointed by him. He has experience now as the Jefferson Parish sheriff, and can probably bring some new ideas to policing that maybe John Fortunato can't, just because he just doesn't have that type of experience. So I think that they can both lay claim to that label, and I think that they both will. And so for voters, they're going to have to decide what kind of experience do they want. They want kind of the old style John Fortunato, Harry Lee type approach, or do they want maybe some new blood, bringing some new approaches in to fight crime in the parish? We'll just have to wait and see.
Really interesting. Well, thanks a lot. Hold on one second. I'm going to press some buttons. So those people who are watching, please go ahead and share with others. If you happen to watch it later on, share. We'll be putting up some of the transcript and some of the video up on Bayou Buzz. So those we'll be doing some more interviews on a whole bunch of different issues this week. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate your joining us again.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Steve. We can do this anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to push some buttons. So 1 second, please. All right. So we did it.
All right, good.